Melinda hated driving at night. She did her best to avoid it. Short trips to the store if she just realized she ran out of tampons or had nothing for dinner after getting home, that sort of thing happened now and then. But she did her best not to go out after dark unless someone was coming to pick her up. So, naturally, she found herself on the longest drive of her life tonight, with no moon, few stars, swirling clouds above her, and acres of forest on either side. As so many unpleasant things in her life, this was her father's fault. She hadn't seen or spoken to the bastard in 15 years, but just after falling asleep tonight. No, that was wrong. It would be yesterday by this time. Out of the blue, her phone rang, and his voice was on the other end. "I need you, Melly. Please come, now." He'd said just that, and then the line went dead. The old ass was probably drunk, but he never called her before, not since she was a child, and he was still trying to convince her mother to take him back. It felt like she had been dreaming, waking up to hear his voice again after all these years. It sounded like he was crying. His voice sounded just the same as the last time she'd heard it. As though in a dream, she had risen, dressed, and gotten in the car. She was well out of town and halfway to his old place before realizing that she had no way of knowing if he even still lived there. She received updates from her mother from time to time over the years about where he was. The last time she heard from her mother about him was 7 years ago. Had he ever stayed in one place that long? Not to her recollection. She had been 7 when her mother finally had enough and showed him the door. Prior to that, a move had come every few months. The house they had been living in was their longest stay in one place, a full 16 months. It turned into 2 years after that, and then the next house had been the one she left when she moved out on her own. In all the time, she heard from him sporadically at best, and had finally decided it was best to simply forget about him. Until tonight. She had found out after a 2-hour drive that she had been right to wonder if he was still in the same place. His last known address was a sketchy apartment in a low-income area of the town she had grown up in. Had he been number 24 or number 42? Maybe he was 14. It definitely had a 4. It didn't matter. His name wasn't on any of the buzzers. Bastard. Her drunk of a father had called her at night, all but demanding she come to him, for reasons he didn't even feel were important enough to tell her over the phone, and then just expected that she would know where he lived now. In a flurry of rage, she turned and marched back to her car, slamming the door and starting off in the direction she came. She was so angry she didn't even look where she was going, and now she'd missed her turn off. The next thing she knew, she was on this lonely stretch of road. Cars were sparse, but she took some comfort in the fact that she would pass one every half hour or so. Her dashboard clock now read 2:27 a.m. She had been driving for more than 5 hours since leaving her house. At night. Every 5 minutes or so she checked her cell phone. Ever since realizing she was lost, she had checked her phone and found no bars at all. She even stopped at a closed, of course, gas station, just sure there should be some service around here somewhere, but nothing. Take stock of your life, Melly, she thought. You're over 30, you hate your job, you and your mother don't get along, you haven't seen or spoken to your father in just under half your life, you have no time for your friends or a relationship thanks to the aforementioned job you hate, and now here you are, trapped on a road you've never been on before, at night, and you can't even so much as call AMA let alone check Google Maps. Smart lady you are. She briefly considered stopping and flagging down the next car that passed. She quickly realized the futility of that plan. Any car on this road would also have no service. So there was nothing for it. She'd have to drive until she saw a house. She'd feel bad for waking someone up, but there was no choice. She needed to find her way back to the main highway. But so far, all that she could see on either side was trees. Mile after mile of trees. No lights shining through the boughs. No sign that anyone had ever been here before, except that there was a road, and people were obviously still driving on it. There weren't even any road signs, other than the mile markers. Had she really found the middle of nowhere? She was just in the middle of this thought when her headlights illuminated something just up the road, a square, wooden sign, obviously made by someone other than the government. This wasn't a gas/food/lodging sign, or a mile marker, or a distance to sign. This looked like the kind of signs advertising a private business was nearby. She slowed down to read it. Granny Royce's Roadhouse. Come stay the night at Granny's. She'll take good care of you. Room. Board. Low prices. Next exit. Her heart sped up. She certainly wasn't interested in spending a night at Granny Royce's, but every business had a phone. At the very least, she'd have a map, or know the way back to the highway. She decided she would stop there. She almost missed the turn. Granny Royce's Roadhouse was buried at the back of a long, dirt driveway, secluded amid the trees. She was almost past the little dirt road that led back to it before realizing it was there. She skidded to a stop and turned in. The little house lay ahead. It was 2 stories, looked to have about 8 to 10 rooms. Big for a home but small for anything announcing room and board. She got closer and looked for a vacancy sign. Nothing. It wasn't that the sign wasn't lit, there was no sign. The porch light was on, and the front of the building was illuminated by that light, and by her headlights. No signs of any kind. She almost wondered if she'd gotten the wrong place, but she was certain that she had seen no other exits between this house and the sign announcing it. She paused in the driveway and took out her cell again. Still no service. She did a quick search for any available wireless signals. To her complete lack of surprise, there were none. Not even any secured. There's no one here but me, she thought. At this point, she wouldn't be surprised to find the house empty, as well. But the light was on, and this was supposed to be a roadhouse. Someone would be manning the front desk. She got out of the car and headed for the front porch. As she turned around to make sure the lights flashed when she hit the lock button on her fob, she thought she could see a flash of movement in the trees. Something human-shaped. She stopped and looked again. Nothing. She decided she imagined it. At the front door, she hesitated. If it really was a roadhouse, then she should be able to just go on in. But what if she got the wrong house? If she tried the door and just walked in, she could find herself arrested out here in buttfuck nowhere. Cautiously, she tried the knob. It turned. She pressed gently on the door. It opened. Relief flooded through her when she saw that she was in a small, but tastefully decorated foyer that had obviously been repurposed as an admissions area. A quaint desk with an honest-to-God guest book had been placed in the far right corner, and some chairs had been set out, along with magazines on a table. She read the titles briefly: Mademoiselle, Blue Book, The New Country Life, Arts and Architecture, before turning her attention to the little desk. There wasn't a computer. That was a cute touch. It was like the house was from a past era. Perhaps old Granny Royce really didn't like modern technology. There was, however, a little bell, just like there would have been in 1929. It wasn't even the round silver kind you slapped to ring, it was a little porcelain handbell. This place was starting to out-cute her. Please let her have a phone, and please let it use the number plan, not 50s exchanges. She picked up the bell and gave it a shake. For a while, nothing happened. Then she saw a light come on in the back room, and the shadow of an old woman sprang up on the wall. The shadow moved toward her, and within a few seconds she saw its owner, Granny Royce, who perhaps looked like every grandmother in every storybook ever. "Well, goodness me," she said. "My lands. Good morning, dearie. Pardon my tardiness, but it's been a while since we got guests at this hour. Can I take your name, honey?" Granny Royce was smallish, her gray hair tied in a neat bun behind her head, a dress that would have looked like it belonged to a senior citizen in the 20s, and a faded pink sweater. Melinda thought that she looked just like she would have wanted her own grandmother to look like, but her mother's mother had died when she was young, and she'd never met her father's mother. It almost hurt to deny this sweet little woman her business, but nevertheless, she had to get home. "Actually, I'm sorry," she began. "But the fact is I'm lost. I'm not even sure where I am in the direction of. Oh, you poor thing, said Granny Royce. You just sit down and let me fix you some tea, or something. You must be cold. Really, thank you, but I'm okay, Melinda said, gently. I just need to use the phone, if I could, or if you've got a map, even that would be lovely. I really only live a couple of hours from here. She trailed off, not knowing if she was even right about that. She easily could have driven those 5+ hours in the wrong direction entirely. Oh dear, said the little woman, sadly. I'm sorry, honey, but the phone lines are down. As for a map, well, I used to have one, and if I look I still might, but it's probably quite out of date by now. The highway moved since then, I know that much. Melinda's heart sank. How could her luck get any worse? No phone, cell or landline, and no map. What could she do? She had to get back home. She was expected to work at 8 a.m. tomorrow. And why were the phone lines down? The weather was coldish but clear. Were they fixing a line nearby? She told Granny Royce the name of her town, but Granny only said, believe it or not, I've never heard of that town. What did you say the name was? She told her again. No, doesn't ring a bell. I'm sorry. But I could not say which direction it's in. Why don't you stay the night, sweetie? I'll give you a discount for your trouble. Thank you. That's very kind of you. But I have work tomorrow and I need to get back home. I'm not even sure why I'm out tonight. The only reason I had doesn't seem to matter anymore. Honey, I wouldn't advise trying to drive back that far tonight, Granny Royce said. Why? It's almost 3 in the morning, and you've not had any sleep. Maybe the lines will be up in the morning, and you can call your work and let them know you'll be late. That won't work, either, she replied. I'm the opener. No one will be there. No, I'm sorry, I've really got to leave. I'll head in the other direction until I find the road I was on. At that, Granny Royce's expression, already one of kind concern, seemed to shift somewhat, to one of fear. She paused, looking at Melinda as though she wanted to say something else to keep her inside. Finally she said, reluctantly, all right, honey, if you're sure. Just you be careful, now. Don't speak to nobody until you're back on the road. That last warning seemed a little silly. After all, what was Melinda, a little girl? She thanked Granny Royce for her kindness and headed back to the car. About halfway to the car she remembered thinking she saw something moving in the trees. Her eyes scanned both sides of the secluded little cleared area she was in, looking for anything that appeared to be moving on its own, rather than being blown by the slight wind. She saw nothing. Satisfied, she headed for her car. All 4 tires were flat. Goddamn it. She leaned down and saw long slash marks on each tire. Someone in this little slice of Green Acres had slashed her tires in the time it took her to find out that she had no way of contacting anyone tonight. Kids from the local farmhouse, gotta be, she thought grimly. Nothing else to do, so you might as well go out at night and slash tires. She stopped and let the reality sink in. She wasn't going anywhere tonight. She had no choice now, she had to stay the night here until morning, when hopefully the phone lines would be up and she could call someone from work to ask them to go in for her, and then AMA to get her tires dealt with. She sighed, then walked back in the house. She could hear Granny Royce as she was walking back to her room. She had already turned off the lights. Resigned to her fate, Melinda rang the little bell again. "That you, miss?" she heard Granny Royce call. "Yes, it's me," she answered. "Sorry to be a bother. My name is Melinda Orton. Sorry I never mentioned it before. I guess I will take a room for the night, if the offer's still good." "Oh, of course it is, dearie," said Granny Royce, re-entering the room and turning the lights back on. "Melinda. Oh, that's such a pretty name, honey. Well, let's get you situated. You put your name and arrival time in the book there and I'll get you a key. All the boarding rooms are on the 2nd floor, and there's only a couple left." "There are others here?" This was surprising. Not a single car had been in the front lawn when she pulled in. "Oh, Yes, Ms. Melinda. Granny was puttering around in the adjacent room. Mr. Norris, young Calvin, there's a few of us here. She came back out with a key in her hand. Just out of curiosity, what made you change your mind? She seemed to brighten as she asked the question, as though relieved that Melinda would stay after all. Oh, it's probably just local kids getting kicks, she said. But I found my tires slashed. Granny stopped suddenly, her face twisted with concern and worry. Then she resumed, as though nothing was wrong. Nothing to be done for it, I suppose, she said, with an air of sadness. Well, not until morning, at any rate, said Melinda. Then hopefully the lines will be up. Oh, said Granny Royce, distractedly. Yes, hopefully. She led Melinda up the darkened staircase into an empty, quiet hall. Or perhaps not so quiet. From one end of the hall came the muffled sound of someone crying. Whoever it was, they were crying softly, not with anger, or petulance, or fear, but with deep sadness. It sounded as if crying was something this person was used to. But they were still unable to stop. Who is that? She asked, pointing in the direction the crying was coming from. Oh, pay that no mind, honey, said Granny. That's just Mr. Norris. He's been like that a while. Older man, you understand. Not all there. She tapped her temple. I understand, Melinda replied, but wondered privately how an old, out-of-touch man would wind up at a roadhouse. Has he been here long? A while, I'd say, answered Granny. Don't really recall how long, exactly. How does he pay for room and board? I guess he doesn't drive, she said to the old woman. Actually, it doesn't look like anyone else here has a car. Granny started at this, looking up with an almost guilty expression. Oh, well, she said. That kind of thing is the business of the guests. I don't ask about such things. She turned the key in the lock of the room she had led Melinda to, and opened the door. Turning on the light, she showed Melinda the quaint little room. Melinda thought it looked like stepping into the past. She could swear this room would have looked modern in the early 50s, at the earliest. Come to think of it, so could the rest of this place, she thought. No wireless service, no computer, that old bell. And those magazines, they looked new, but... That thought was cut off as Granny put the key on the nightstand and started in with instructions. Now, the bathroom is down the hallway there. You'll be sharing with the whole floor, so please bear that in mind if you have to go. There's a shower schedule on the door, as well. First come, first serve. You just add your name to the first available line and that's the order the showers are in. I wouldn't worry about that, if I were you, though. I'm sure you'll be first in line. I get up at 6 a.m. sharp every morning and start breakfast, but you come on down whenever you're ready and I'll whip something up for you. Oh, and one last thing, my dear. I would strongly advise you not to leave the house until sunup. You just never know what could happen out there. In the dark. Of course, she replied. I'd never go out there in the dark if I didn't have to. She stopped the train of thought right out of the gate. After a few moments, she was alone. Alone, without anything to wear to bed, and nothing to shower, brush her teeth, or hair with in the morning. She sat on the bed and looked out the window, which faced front. Her car still sat where she had left it, the only thing for miles that seemed like part of her world. And inexpensive, over large paper. Wait until I can get a hold of someone, she thought bitterly. Despite the hominess of the room, she felt an unwillingness to rise and shut off the light. Somehow the thought of going to sleep in this backward little room seemed unthinkable. So instead, she continued to sit and stare out the window. A figure in black detached itself from the shadows of the trees and made its way to her car. The hell? She jumped up and ran at the window. The figure was tall, and seemed to be wearing a cloak made of night. She saw as its arm extended. In its hand was a long, jagged dagger. It dragged the dagger across the side of her car, leaving a long gash mark in the paint and metal. Hey! She shouted. The figure kept dragging the dagger. She reached for the window to open it. It wouldn't budge. She looked for a lock, but couldn't see one. "Hey!" she yelled again. This time the figure raised its head. She could see the glint of two eyes under the hood. The figure raised the dagger, slowly, determinedly. It pointed it straight at her face. She leaped away from the window and ran for the door. A noise on the other side stopped her. Footsteps. Dragging, shambling footsteps. And crying. The sound of a person for whom deep, longing sadness is a way of life. Mr. Norris. She waited. Somehow, she just felt that she should let the old man pass before she opened the door. Before he got very far, however, she heard other footsteps, these much quicker and lighter, run up the stairs and stop near the door of her room. "Stop it!" hissed Granny Royce. "Go back in your room right now. You know better. She can't see you yet. Hopefully she won't have to at all. Now you go back in there. You've got no business being out at this hour anyway." What on earth? How could that sweet old woman talk to another human that way, let alone an old man with a foggy mind? She almost opened the door right then, but somehow her hand stopped, and waited until the shuffling, crying man had made his way back down the hallway. She heard his door open. She opened her own door just in time to see his foot, shod in a well-worn house shoe, slide into his room. The door closed softly after him. That poor man, she thought. But now she was determined to find out what was going on. The punk outside in the Halloween costume slashing up her car, followed by Granny yelling at an old man, made her begin to understand that not all was well here. She went back down to the front desk area, which was completely unlit except for the moonlight and porch light coming through the window. There was, however, a light on near the back room that Granny Royce had emerged from before. Melinda paused to take a look outside the front window. The maniac with the dagger was nowhere to be seen for the moment, but she was now determined that it was he that she had seen moving through the trees. "He could have killed me." She strode in the direction of the light, seeing that it was the light to the kitchen. She kept going, expecting to find Granny Royce still puttering about with whatever an old innkeeper did with herself during the early hours of the morning. Instead, she found Granny sitting with a young man of about 20. He had dark hair, and a scruff of stubble, and was wearing a dark brown corduroy shirt and khakis, along with a pork pie hat. He looked like he was ready to go sell newspapers on a street corner in the 30s. He was quietly sipping tea while Granny was admonishing him from the other end of the table. "Now that was a horrible thing to say," she said. "When I was your age, young men minded their manners." "That's a laugh, talking about my age," muttered the young man with a sneer. "And just how old are you? Do you even remember?" "Calvin Davidson, you are trouble, young man," she hissed back. Neither had noticed Melinda yet. "One of these days you're going to say something you'll regret." "Oh, come on, Granny, what could I possibly say that will make things worse than they already are?" demanded Calvin. "I mean, look at old Mr. Norris up there. Both of us are old. Hello, miss. I didn't know we had anyone else here." He had just seen Melinda. Hi," she said. She had the feeling she'd walked in on an old argument the two of them had had many times, and that did not concern her. Her fear and anger were forgotten for the moment. Calvin had been talking to Granny like a sullen kid, but something about what they were saying seemed wrong. "Can I help you, Melinda?" asked Granny Royce. "Is there something wrong with your room?" That brought her back. "No," she said. "The room is fine. But nothing else is. I mean, what on earth do you even have a roadhouse out here where it seems like no one ever stops? Why are most of the rooms full even though mine is the only car out there? Why did I hear you talking to Mr. Norris like he was a dog? And why would you want to make sure I didn't see him?" She got no further before Calvin cut her off. "Good Lord, she's not even been here a night and she can see it. Why did you even let her in, Granny? Why don't you just bolt the door? Hell, if I could go take down that sign, don't you think I would have, by now? Lord love a duck." "There's something you don't hear many young men say," thought Melinda. She decided to ignore Calvin for the moment, otherwise. "And besides that, there's someone out there. He's the freak who slashed my tires and he's been out there messing up my car since then. And you can't even call the police. Are you gonna tell me you've never had vandals out here before?" There was a long pause in the room. Neither Granny, nor Calvin, seemed willing to break it. Calvin scratched at his neck. For the first time, Melinda noticed a red slash at his throat, half hidden by his collar. It looked like either a very fresh scar or a slightly healed wound. "Listen, miss, I don't know your name," he finally said. "Melinda," she told him. "Melinda," he repeated. "Melinda, I think you should sit down. I have to tell you something that you may find troubling." Melina did not like how he said that. She also didn't like the way his tone had switched from sullen child to serious adult. He looked several years her junior, but he was talking to her like he was her uncle, or her boss. He swallowed a sip of tea, and sighed. Then he looked her straight in the face and said, "The reason I don't have a car out there is that when I got here, no one my age, in my line of work, would have owned a car. It would have seemed like an impossible dream." What are you talking about?" she asked, hesitantly. "I worked in a textile mill," he said. "The mill was shut down by the time I got here. Most businesses were. So I struck out on my own, a drifter looking for what work I could find. And I stopped here. Forever." "Businesses were shut down. I don't understand," said Melinda. "We're having a rough time of it right now, but businesses are mostly staying open." "Not then, they weren't," said Calvin, sadly. "I arrived here in 1929. Melinda blinked. Something had exploded behind her eyes. "This place was new, then," said Granny. "My man and I had just opened it. And young Mr. Calvin was a sweet young lad of 16. I offered to take him on as hired help over my husband's objections. Well, my husband was a well-meaning man, but he knew how to pinch a penny. 'Twas a year after I took Calvin on that Mr. Royce died. Calvin and I have been here ever since. And every few years or so, someone joins us." "Yep," Calvin broke in. "Miss Tilly was first. She was a woman of ill repute who ran here, pregnant and scared that the man who'd run her trade up in New York was gonna find her and kill her. She and that baby." He broke off, now seeming on the point of tears. "And then," said Granny, "there was Mr. Standish. He was a traveling minister. He doesn't travel anymore." "Mr. Norris got here in '69, said Calvin. "His story is probably the worst. He was he was a bank robber, you see. Carried a pistol. And he didn't like learning how long we'd all been here." He paused, stood and walked to the kitchen window. "He tried to leave on his own, you see. He ain't the first to try it. That was me, actually. I warned him not to try, but he wouldn't listen. But when he got outside and he met him." "Calvin," hissed Granny. "We don't talk about this." "She's gotta know," said Calvin. "There's no point in her finding out slowly." "There's still a chance for her," said Granny in a stage whisper. "All she has to do is wait until morning." "She's not going to wait until morning," said Calvin, with some remorse in his voice. "No one ever waits until morning. The fact that she came down here is proof enough of that. Besides, what good would that have really done her? Her car is useless. We have no phones here. There was no phone when this place went up, and there won't never be a phone here. You know that." "Okay, everyone, stop," Melinda shouted. "That's enough. Now, you can't keep me prisoner here, and I have no intention of staying any longer. Only that knife-wielding maniac out there is keeping me from running up the road this minute. Now, I need to know what's really going on here, and I need to know it now." "We've been telling you," Calvin said. "Granny may not want you to know everything, but you need to. Because you won't be leaving. Oh, we're not trying to keep you prisoner. I don't even care if you run out that door right now. But you'll never leave this house again afterward." "Like hell I won't," yelled Melinda. "Listen, child," said Granny, rising from her spot at the table. "Listen, please. None of us mean you harm, my dear, not even Mr. Norris. There's scant he can do anymore, and he knows it. That's why he's up there crying all the time. But we're stuck here, all of us. I hope there was a chance for you to run for it in the morning, but Calvine's right. There's no guarantee you'd be safe in the morning, anyhow. What the hell is wrong with this place? Choked out Melinda. She was beginning to break down. She could feel the tears welling in her eyes. It was about a month after Mr. Royce died, said Calvine. When he came, he was wearing that long, black robe, and carrying that ridiculous dagger. I saw him when I was trimming the hedges in the back. I told him he needed to get out of here, because I didn't like his look. He moved so fast I never saw it coming. And he got me, from here. Calvin touched his neck. To here. He touched his lower abdomen on the opposite side from the neck slash. He began to undo his shirt. Melinda almost vomited. Under his shirt was a long, ugly slash that went deep. And was still seeping blood. She could see bone, muscle and intestines wriggling within that mangled ruin. I died that night, said Calvine. But then I didn't. The next thing I knew, I was being dragged into the house by Granny, and when I woke up I nearly scared her to death. She was sure that I was gone. The thing is, I was. But I was awake. I could talk, walk, do anything I could while alive. Well, except take any enjoyment or nourishment from food or drink anymore. I still drink the tea because it keeps my skin from turning ash gray. I learned that about 50 years ago. He didn't go away, though. Granny broke in. I went out to deal with him, carrying my axe. He took my axe and buried it in my back. I won't show you the wound, honey. Calvin shouldn't have shown you his, either. No one should have to see it. But that's how he works, Melinda, continued Calvine. He's got that knife, but if you try to use a weapon on him, he just moves like he doesn't take it from you. You never stand a chance. He'll use whatever weapon you try to take him down with to end you. Mr. Norris learned that the hard way. This is not happening. Melinda was ready to break down. She had to hold it together. She had to get out of here, somehow. Nothing about this was right. Nothing about it could be real. It was all a dream, too much didn't make sense. Her father calling her out of the blue. Her leaving to go to him without a second thought. Getting lost so quickly, and so irreversibly. No cell phone service anywhere on this road. This place, everything about it. She was dreaming, that had to be it. But if so, she was gonna survive this dream. She turned and ran for the stairs. Her purse was still in her room, but she was going to grab it and go. She'd had enough. Protesting voices began babbling behind her, she cared not one whit. Mr. Norris was waiting at the top of the stairs. Contrary to Granny Royce's description of him, he was not old at all. No more than about 40. But she saw instantly what she meant by not all there. The top half of Mr. Norris's head looked normal, like a reasonably attractive man with dark hair peppered with gray here and there. His eyes, a clear green, were moist with fresh tears. The lower half of his face was a ruin of bone fragments, shredded muscle and blood. So much blood. His left side was similarly destroyed. His arm hung on a few hanging strings of muscle, his hip was just as much a mess of bone and blood as his face was. He kept his one good hand on the banister as he shuffled toward her. Behind him stood a young woman in a bra and a pair of panties. Her stomach was cut open, and looking out of the wound with bright, intelligent eyes was the mangled remains of a baby. Melinda turned and bolted for the front door. Her hand had just closed around the knob when Calvine rushed up to her, placing his freezing cold hand over hers. "They're not going to hurt you," he said quickly. "But he will. If you step out for so much as a moment, he will kill you, and it will hurt. And it will go on hurting. Forever. After a while you learn to function with the pain, but it never goes away." Sobbing, she asked the question she'd been afraid to ask since coming here. "Who is he?" "We don't know," said Granny, from behind Calvine. "He just came here, and he won't go away. He likes to watch us, and do things to incite us to come out again. As soon as someone does, he hurts them more. But no matter how many times he kills us, we don't die. Believe me when I say, we all wish we could. Melinda had had enough of this. She pushed Calvin away and threw open the door. He was standing on the porch. The knife was held out in front of him, just at face level. Melinda ran into him at a rush, the knife puncturing her right eye and its tip sliding on through, out the other side. She just managed to see the grinning, pure white face of her killer, before everything went black. A few hours later, the house erupted with screams from upstairs, as Melinda awoke to a world of pain, the like of which she'd never known. Credit to writer Josh 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 Known. My boss is an absolute dipshit. Sorry, I hate to be so blunt, but that's just the way it is. My name is Sarah Collins and I work as a personal assistant for a private law firm. It's probably safer for you if I don't mention where. Anyway, back to my asshole sleazebag of a boss. He's a short, fat little man who walks around the office like a total big shot, Rolex watch, Armani suit. You get the picture. He's also got one of those ridiculous mustaches that look like a gerbil sleeps on new upper lip. He's a completely sexist pig and treats me like garbage. To give you an example, the other day he walked past my desk and pretended to trip, spilling a giant glass of water over my white blouse, making my shirt see-through. It was so embarrassing. I would have left ages ago if I didn't need the money so much. Simon Jones is his name. He orders me around like a dog, with no respect or praise at all. But back to the point. The other day, after his usual rounds of berating everyone in the office, he headed to his private lift to whisk him away to the safety of his ridiculously large office. Yet, when he pressed the button, a screeching noise of metal on metal filled the room and smoke billowed through the closed doors of the elevators. It was broken, which, as you can imagine, made for a pleasant morning for the rest of us. Not. He stormed into my cubicle, his stash twitching furiously. I don't care how you get it done, or how much it costs, but if that elevator isn't fixed overnight, it's coming out of your pay. He leaned closer. Slut, he whispered. I lowered my gaze, my face burning ferociously. Yes sir, I mumbled. Unfortunately, this would mean that I would have to spend the rest of the day searching for a repairman. After 2 hours of searching, I had made no progress and realized I was screwed. When everyone had left the office and it turned to 9 p.m., my finger scrolled down the webpage further and further, but I thought it was pointless. What sort of mechanic is open past 9? My heart fluttered when I saw the next ad. It didn't stand out and the wording was dull and boring, but there it was, Mr. Mechanic, we fix everything. It also said that they were available whenever needed. I called their number, which was really unusual, 005-555-555. A voice picked up on the other end, male but no emotion whatsoever. Hello Miss Collins, it said. Hey, I replied before getting straight to the point. He was patient and when I was finished he said, I will depart shortly. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't realize then that I hadn't mentioned my name yet. He arrived faster than I had expected. His gray overalls were matched by his gray cap that both sported the slogan on the website. He was tall and unusually slim and his eyes were dull and glassy like marbles. I led him to the elevator and told him that I'd be catching some sleep in my office. An hour later I woke at my desk, a pool of dribble formed at my mouth. The office was eerily quiet. I looked up and the mechanic was staring at me from the door to my cubicle. All finished, he said. Great, you're a lifesaver. What's the charge? I replied. He told me there was no fee as it was an extremely simple job. I thought he was joking, but then he nodded at me, took off his hat and left. I locked up and went home and dreamed of men with gray hair and glass eyes. Simon Jones strolled around his office impatiently whilst drinking a glass of bourbon he had poured himself 2 hours earlier. He was waiting for the CEO of a competing company to arrive so they could attend lunch together and discuss the civility of their situation. In frustration he threw his glass against the wall and it shattered everywhere. The phone at his desk buzzed and he jogged over to pick it up. "Mr. Jones, the competition has arrived, sir." Good was all he said before slamming down the phone and heading to his elevator. He pressed the button and the doors slid open silently and smoothly. He smiled to himself and adjusted his tie around his bulbous neck. Whoever that dumb assistant of his had hired, they had done a good job. Jones took one step forward, but his foot found no purchase and he fell, screaming 34 stories down an elevator shaft to his death. After my boss died, his brother took charge. He was a great guy who gave me a promotion and a pay raise. A touch of class. There was an investigation, but when tested following the incident, the elevator functioned perfectly. I was asked to show the police the number and the web page of the mechanic I had called, but the page had disappeared, and when I called the number in front of the police, a mechanical voice informed us that the number did not exist. However, one warm evening I was walking back to my apartment and a gray van swerved around the corner. The glassy-eyed man was behind the wheel. It may have been my imagination, but he turned quickly to me, doffed his hat and gave me the briefest of smiles before disappearing around the next corner. I never saw him again, but the words on his van, overalls, hat and webpage are forever stuck in my head. We fix everything. We thank you all for coming here today on such short notice. It's very kind of you, and I wish I had something better to say to you all. Or at least something that won't sound so crazy and so, creepy. But it is what it is, and what it is something I have to do. Have to. Even though it may not help me. It's what's right is all. It's the truth. So here goes. I am not a hero. That's the thing of it. What I mean is, I am not going to say that it wasn't really me that was there that night or anything, or that I was in cahoots with that sicko, or anything like that. It's not some elaborate hoax. In fact, it's even more horrific than you know. Also, I'm not being modest. I promise the truth, and it's hard to say this, but it's just got to come out the way it is in my head. So I'm going to ask for your patience, and to hold your questions for the end. As you all know, I drive a bus by that old house. It's part of my route. And as you have all heard, I saw something suspicious that night, and decided to do my civic duty, and here we are. But there is a lot more to it than that. What I saw was a hell of a lot more than suspicious, and when I went into that house, civic duty was the furthest thing from my mind. You see, I had known something weird was going on there for months. What exactly, I did not know. What I mean is, I thought some completely different weirdness was going on. Nothing like. I think it was early spring when I first saw the girl in the window. Cute as a button, young but not too young. I am not that flavor of pervert, and wearing nothing other than a white shift. I say I saw her, but I didn't really. Not then. Back then, she was just kind of a hint of motion in the darkness. A bit where the dark wasn't completely dark. Some motion that might have been the wind, or a bit of fog, or some papers blowing around. Indistinct. Easy to ignore, or to rationalize. But I guess my mind kind of took hold of that hint and built on it. Maybe that caused what happened next. You see, what none of my fine customers will say, now that I am the darling of the press, is that I am a creeper. It's on record at my job. I have been reprimanded for staring too long, or making flirty comments to the wrong people. I have never committed a crime, nor have I been actually punished. Never took it that far. But I have to say that, because you need to understand that I don't date much. Ever, really. I am kind of a big guy, handsome enough in my way, and I even have women friends that hang out with me. Everybody says I am a nice guy, if a bit quiet, and it's true. I let people slide on bus fare and make up the difference myself sometimes. I come help friends in the middle of the night when they are in trouble, and I don't get stupid when I'm drunk. But I don't have girlfriends. Because I guess I want certain things too much and they sense it. They sense the desperation and the anger, I guess. And they stay away. So I suppose I think about women a lot, and I imagine things. I think maybe at first I thought I was just imagining the girl. It was like that for a while. The bus would take me by that house at night, and I would stop at the stop, and I would look around like I was looking for traffic or something on that lonely road, at that empty intersection. I would look around real slow, slower than at any other intersection. What I was really doing was sneaking a glance at that house. At that one room at the end of the new extension. At that window. Because inside that window I could see or imagine a little bit of motion. Some darkness that wasn't completely dark. Something that kind of resembled a girl, dancing all slow and sexy. And when I did it, I swear to you, I could feel something. A connection. Like I was feeding something, even if it was just my own imagination. And each time, it seemed like I could see a little more. Yeah, it was weird and unexplainable. I mean, it wasn't like the bus was on time every time. How could she know just when to be in that window? And why would she be dancing in the dark? But every time, it seemed like the room got a little brighter, a bit more real. I guess I figured she had a room light on, a dimmer switch or something. I don't know. But after a while, I began to make out details. The girl, at first, of course. Long, jet black hair, with long bangs. I couldn't see much of her face, maybe just an eye, or the corner of her mouth. Just enough to know that when I looked at her, she looked right back at me. And smiled, just a little. Yeah, I know how that sounds, but that is what I honestly believed back then. I never added up how I could see a facial expression that far away in the dim. Never wanted to, I guess. I was focused on other things. I could see her slim body, not ideal. I usually prefer women with more meat on their bones, with her hands up above her head, doing that slow shimmy in that white shift that covered everything and hinted at everything. I was sure she wasn't wearing nothing under it. I was sure she was teasing me. After all, what could I do? Pull the bus over and hop out, walk up to the door and ask for a date? I was totally safe to mess with. To make a fool of. After a while, I could make out details in the room. A dresser. A bed. A single light fixture with a beaded chain. Old wood paneling on the walls. And after a while, her room went from being a dark room in a dark house, to being the only lit room in the dark house. She was keeping the light on for me, like it says in that radio commercial. I guess at the time of night, it made sense for there never to be another car in the driveway or nothing. No clue that maybe she lived with somebody or anything. My mind took that and ran with it. Maybe she danced in a bar somewhere. Maybe that was how she paid for that ramshackle place. Maybe she had gotten tired of the usual customers and sworn off of men, so she lived alone. Maybe that had gotten old, and she had gotten lonely. So she was throwing a little bone hay to a lonely bus driver before she went to bed in that ramshackle house all alone at night. It went on for months. It became the damned highlight of my day. It was our little secret, she and me. No one else on the bus really noticed her, or even if they glanced over at the little house and saw her dancing there, they never said anything about it. Maybe give a little jump and a shiver and look away. No, her teasing was all for me. So I guess, in a way, it was inevitable. One day I came driving along around the usual time, maybe a little early. It was deep dark, not just due to the hour, but because of the storm that blew into town that night. The bus stop up the road had been drenched, buckets of water pouring down from the heavens, and no one had been there. The bus was empty. It was just me. So it was just me and her. I knew my bosses would believe me if I told them the storm was the reason I was late to my next stop. I knew the accident camera on the bus wasn't working. I knew that what I was about to do was stupid, incredibly stupid. I mean, what did I expect? Would she say, "About time," and pull me into her bed? Would we make small talk and find out we had a lot in common? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. The angrier I got, the hornier I got. I stared through the rain, at what was just a blurry splash of light on the corner, due to the storm. And I pulled over. I didn't even pull my coat over my head or nothing. I just walked toward the house. It was like my brain was full of some angry static. I swear to you. I swear to you, I have no idea what I would have done. As you know, I am a big guy. Well, the doorbell didn't work, and knocking politely didn't work, and I found myself thinking about just shouldering the old door open, and then, something, I don't know what. I heard something. Maybe it was just my imagination, twisting the rain and the wind and the trash blowing through the yard into something I wanted to hear. It was indistinct. But I swear to you it sounded like a woman's voice. It sounded like the word, help. That was all the excuse I needed. I don't know why I was surprised that the inside of the house was dark. It had been dark every time I had seen it. But there was something. Something about, I don't know, the quality of the darkness just seemed wrong, somehow. Too old. Too easy. I felt around and found the light switch. Clicked it on. Nothing. Storm put the power out? I wasn't sure, there had been light from the one window seconds ago. I put my cell phone on flashlight mode and swept it around. It was weird. The place looked abandoned, and not, at the same time. A layer of dust on some things, but not everything. Furniture in the places you would expect furniture to be, but they looked unused somehow. Ignored. There was a faint trail in the dust on the floor. A trail leading to that room, her room. I noticed that there was no light coming from the cracks in her door. I mustered up a little gumption, and coughed loudly. I figured she must have heard me coming through the front door like a freight train, and I was not sure why she had not said anything. A bunch of thoughts went through my head, each contradicting the other. I spoke up. Miss? Your power seems to be out. You need any help? I sounded stupid and guilty and creepy, even to myself. I felt a little like I was being drawn toward that bedroom on a string. My heart was pounding. About half of the water on my face was sweat. I didn't know whether to stomp toward the door so she would know I was coming, or to sneak up on it all careful like, so I tried to do both at once. I must have sounded like a zombie shuffling around. It took forever to reach that door. I took a hold of the knob and twisted. It was locked. I hesitated. I listened. I thought. Maybe she was hunkered down in the dark, scared to death of me, some strange bus driver who had barged into her powerless house with her all alone and vulnerable in the dark. But maybe, just maybe, she needed my help, somehow. Could I come all this way and turn back now? I'd feel like a coward forever, and if she decided to call the cops on me, I had already done more than enough to get me arrested. I swear to you I could feel it then. Like a string attached to my navel, or maybe a straw. I was being pulled into that room. Something was being pulled out of me and into that room. I was feeding something, maybe her lust, maybe mine, I don't know. It took 3 tries, but I got that door open. And as it opened, I felt and heard something. A breath. An inhalation. One moment, I was in utter darkness, except for the bluish-white glow of the cell phone in my front pocket. The next, I was surrounded by a soft, warm, yellowish light. An old record player, just like I had imagined, was playing an old love song I couldn't quite place. The bed looked fluffy and soft and inviting. The dresser clean but old, with a warped and blurry old mirror atop it, and scattered upon it was a tiny jewelry box and some makeup containers. In the center of the room, beautiful as the night itself, was the girl. Petite, slender, in nothing but a white shift, with her long black hair obscuring her face. Her arms were up above her head as always, and she was dancing, twirling in that slow shimmy. She looked up at me, and she was beautiful, with pouting red lips and big white black eyes. She looked at me and smiled, inviting. I don't think what happened next was her fault entirely. I had my part in it. I could feel the connection between us stronger than ever, like a pipe feeding from her shift-covered belly button into mine. A flow. And I think it was the darkness in me that made it bad. I wanted her, loved her a little, but that anger was there, too. And I think her anger fed into it as well and things got twisted. Things went to hell. You see, I don't think they see the way we do. It's not like they have rods and cones in their eyes and nerves and all that junk. I think they see spirit or energy or something. I think for a moment, she mistook me for the sicko. For the guy that had put her there, so long ago. She saw the darkness in me that was like his, and she got mad. And all of that strength that I had been feeding her through that connection, through my lust, I think it was that what made her strong enough to change. The expression on her face twisted. It became angry and lustful all at once. Her eye, the one I could see, grew. It was eating her face. It was an angry dark pit that she was being sucked into. That I was being sucked into. It was a hungry insatiable force, a scary dark place, bigger than the room or the house or maybe this whole damn planet. Her hair enveloped me, and the scariest part was that part of me wanted that hell. That was when the sicko showed up. In an instant, she was gone. The room was plunged into darkness, except for the bright white of the sicko's mag light shining in my face. He didn't say a word, just cocked his gun, and that sound dropped the world into the pit of my stomach. I was going to get shot and die in this ramshackle house by the road, and no one was ever going to believe that I wasn't some sort of. I am not afraid to tell you that I felt tears start in my eyes at that moment. I thought about rushing him, but I could not see anything other than that damned light in my eyes, and I knew the instant I started forward, he would fire. If only he would say something, give me a chance to explain. But how could I explain? Why had I come here in the middle of the night? Where was the girl? Who was she? I hesitated. She did not. Through our connection, I felt something. Recognition, hate, all of that. I felt something that I could no longer see, rush away from me. And into him. He jerked, the mag light swinging away from me. I was still dazzled, blind, but I felt through her that his gun was no longer pointing my way. I trusted that feeling and I tackled him. I'm a big guy. You know the rest. Except you don't. I never wanted anything more in my life than to kill that man at that moment. But at the time, I didn't understand why. I only knew I was feeling her anger, her embarrassment, her violation, her rage. And something in me, I don't know, opened up. The lust went away, along with my rage, and I wanted just to comfort her, to absorb her sadness. To tell her that somehow, it was all going to be alright. To help her, not to help myself to her. I stopped myself from killing him. I stopped her from killing him. It was then that my head began to clear, and I realized that I had just beaten a man unconscious in what was probably his house in the middle of the night. Except he obviously didn't live here. I took his mag light and shined it around. The bedroom where I had seen the girl was old, dusty. The dresser and the bed were there, but they had long since deteriorated. The sheets were ratty, with holes everywhere. The mirror had shattered years before. The light fixture above me had no bulb, and hung at an angle with something like a rusty wire noose dangling from it. The window through which I had seen the girl for months, had a thick, dusty blanket nailed across it. Everything in the room was covered in dust, except the throw rug at my feet. As you all know, beneath that throw rug was a trapdoor, leading into a soundproof crawl space with 3 more girls, still alive, but starving and in danger of drowning from leaky, pooling water. I called 911 and thus became a hero. What you don't know is that I saw the girl once more. Twice, if you count the photo online of her, the sicko's first victim from years before, her bones dug up from beneath the crawl space. The bus wasn't involved this time. I shudder every time I reach that corner now, and I have been known to run that light if there aren't any cars coming, and there never are. No, one time after that all happened, I drove back there in my own car. I had to know how much had actually happened, and how much was my crazy. The whole house was dark that time, and I did not dare to go inside, although the police tape and seesaw barriers and the press had long gone. But I strolled around to that bleak black window where I had seen the girl, and I stared into that darkness. And she came to me. She wasn't distinct this time. I guess she had used up most of the energy I had given her or something. But I could see her pale face, her splayed hands against the inside glass of that window. Her one eye, staring at me. I was drawn to her, and I stepped up to that window, tears streaming down, glad I had saved those girls but ashamed of why. She was still angry at me, and I could understand why. She had seen the darkness in my soul, had felt it. I came right up to the window and I covered her hand with mine. If she had swallowed me into hell in that moment, well, I reckon I would have deserved it. But she showed me a kindness. She whispered to me in that same indistinct but carrying voice I had heard before. "Tell them the truth." And so I have. Is this enough for her? Is she going to still come after me on some lonely night? Maybe. I'm not really doing this to save myself. Now you all think I am plumb crazy, and maybe I am. Maybe now the press will stop calling me a hero, and all those girls who couldn't give me the time of day before will stop buying me drinks at every bar in town. Maybe now I will lose my job, and not have to drive past that house anymore. I don't know. But telling the truth is the right thing to do, and now I've done it. Thank you all very much. Credit to Kitsune Ninetails. Credit to Kitsune Ninetails. Credit to Kitsune Ninetails. One of my friends is a paramedic in New York. Don't ask me why, but it was always his dream to become one, and New York being the big and wild city that it is, he has of course seen some crazy things. He doesn't talk about his experiences much since they are always very personal and often disturbing, but I know that he has encountered his fair share of gruesome stabbings and gunshots. For example, he told us how one time some kids were playing with a shotgun, and one of them got his jaw blown off. The boy was still alive as my friend rushed him to the ER and eventually lived, but he is horribly disfigured now and has to eat through a tube for the rest of his life. There were other, stranger things. He told us once how he responded to a call where an elderly woman managed to decapitate herself at home alone. They found her body sitting in a chair in front of the TV, which was still on, and her head was laying on its side in the middle of the floor beside a puddle of blood. Her door was locked and all the windows were closed. All they know is that her neighbors heard a loud thud in her apartment and called the police when she didn't answer her door, but no one has figured out exactly how it happened. Yet by far the strangest, creepiest story that he ever told us is the one about the mysterious subway deaths that happened several years ago. A few of my other friends and I were hanging out at his apartment one time, drinking and listening to music, when the topic of ghosts came up. We started by talking playfully about ghost experiences we had as children, just shadows in the corner of the eye, feelings of being watched, and stuff like that, but then my friend spoke up and said in a very serious voice that he wanted to tell us a story that he swore to God actually happened and freaked him out so much that it sometimes kept him awake and, when he rode the subway late at night, almost gave him panic attacks. We all became serious as he told us the following story, which I will now tell you. So, my friend said a couple of years ago that the ambulance crews started getting calls about once every week about people found dead on the subway. The deaths always happened between a few particular stations. He said the names, but I can't recall them exactly. The NY subway system is huge, and always happened late at night when the cars were almost deserted. In fact, the victims were always found alone in the subway cars sitting or lying on the benches, and there were never any witnesses. Another detail is that all the victims were males and died of heart attacks, sometimes even when they were unusually young. After the calls had been coming in steady for a couple of months, the story started to get some minor attention. The police checked footage from the cameras in the stations, but never saw anyone get on or off the trains regularly that made them think that a particular person was causing the heart attacks with drugs or a stun gun or by some other means. There was no explanation. It seemed that some unlucky guy would be riding a subway car, everyone else would happen to get off, and then sometime when he was alone in the car between stations he would simply have a massive heart attack and die. The newspaper even ran a small insert about the case in the back reaches of the police blotter, perhaps you even saw it, asking for information, yet nothing came of it. But eventually my friend was lucky, or unlucky, enough to get a clue about what might have been going on. He was on duty one night when his crew responded to a call about one of the heart attacks, but this time the person managed to survive. They picked him up from the platform of one of the stations, where he was lying on the ground with a jacket from a Good Samaritan who called 911 under his head. The person who placed the call was still there and said that when he entered the car he saw the man sitting slumped over on one of the benches and gasping for breath, then called 911 when the man indicated that he needed help. My friend assisted in strapping the guy, who was about 40 or so, into a stretcher and was with him in the back of the ambulance as they went to the emergency room. The man was well enough to talk, and my friend listened to him while he did whatever medical things one does in such a situation. Soon he realized that something abnormal was going on in the subway, something that still disturbs him to this day. The man said that he was on his way home from an exhausting shift at work late at night as usual. There were just a few people in the car when he boarded, and he was very tired and started nodding off as he sat in the car. He said he remembered at one point in between naps that the car became deserted except for him. Then he suddenly awoke to find himself paralyzed. He could see in front of him what was going on, but couldn't move anything, not even blink. He tried to yell, to moan, to do something, but the only result of his inward efforts was silence. He said that he had experienced sleep paralysis before, usually at home, but it was what happened next that almost killed him. As he was sitting there paralyzed, the train rolling between stations, he saw a little girl walking towards him. She was neither happy nor sad, he said, just an average little girl like you would see walking down the street, but she was transparent, as if he were watching a reflection in a window. He began to feel extremely anxious as she came nearer but still couldn't move. She did not look at his eyes, but he said that she looked at him as if she knew him. She acted like it as well. She climbed up into his lap and curled herself into a ball as if to sleep, just the way you often see little girls do with their parents when they are tired. At that moment, he said his heart attack started. The little girl was cold and motionless as she sat in his lap, and he said the cold from her crept over his whole body until it began to feel like someone was squeezing the middle of his chest. He started to lose his breath, but there was nothing he could do. The little girl just sat there in his lap, filling him up with cold. Suddenly the subway arrived at the next station and the little girl dissolved, the man's words, from his lap just before he heard the door open. That's when the Good Samaritan who made the call came up to him, he said. My friend related that the man survived the incident and recovered fully. The calls about heart attacks continued to come in for another month or so, then mysteriously stopped just as quickly as they had started. No conventional explanation was ever found that could fully explain the incident. My friend offered a couple theories of his own as to what might have happened. First, he said that sleep paralysis is fairly common and often is accompanied by vivid dreams and hallucinations, which could explain what the man saw. Yet it does not explain the wave of heart attacks, all occurring to males alone on the subway, all between roughly the same stations. Unfortunately, for the sake of finding the truth, the lucky man was, at least to my friend's knowledge, the only one to survive, and consequently there are no other stories to corroborate his. The other theory is that there really was a ghost of a little girl who caused the heart attacks on the subway. Like any big city, New York has a lot of domestic crime and many broken families. My friend speculated that she was a girl who was perhaps killed by one of her parents or who maybe died when she somehow wandered into the subway tunnels after running away from home and spent the time after her death searching for her father. Of course, no one knows for sure. After my friend finished speaking, we all sat there silently, staring at the ground. Some upbeat song played in the background from the stereo, but the mood was dead by now and stayed that way until my friends and I went home. When we did, I don't think a single one of us took the subway that evening. Credit to SC Donahue. It was in the last day of the year 2015 in which we received our message. We were preparing for a New Year's party, and we were cleaning out the attic. We thought there'd be chairs. What he thought instead was a cassette tape player. It was, no doubt, from at least the 80s. My sister was the one to find it. I was the one to press play. Neither of us had any idea of how to work the thing. Pressing play hadn't helped. My sister realized the volume was down and turned it up. Unfortunately, we had one more issue. It was slow beyond recognition. I left the attic by this time. We didn't have time to fix an old cassette player. My sister, on the other hand, stayed. I started getting ready for the party we were throwing for New Year's Eve, and continued my work for at least an hour until I realized my sister had not come down to help me yet. "Rachel. You okay?" I called. There wasn't a response. I called again. "Rachel." Frightened something could have happened, I ran up to the attic. I opened up the door and found her listening to the cassette tape. "Rachel. I thought you were hurt. Why didn't you answer me?" She looked up to me with a blank stare and a glimmer of fear. "Sorry," she mumbled, "I got the player to work, see?" "Yeah, I see. But we need to get ready. In 15 minutes people are going to be showing up to the party." "Hold on," she said, fumbling with the player. "What?" "Listen to this." "No. Didn't you hear? People will be coming soon." I assessed the situation. I could finish getting ready for the party alone. Rachel clearly wasn't going to be much help. Fine then. I left the attic and ran around the house, fixing a table, getting snacks. When I finished, the doorbell rang almost as I put the last bag of chips on the table. The party was going well. Around 11:45 the most people arrived. We were all excited for New Year's. What would the future bring? The best moment only lasted a few moments. This was because my sister ran down the stairs to call me into the attic. Her face was pale. I went upstairs. "What? What's wrong?" "Listen to the tapes," she commanded. The tape played. Case 205A, James Edmund Brown of the Charles Millennium Asylum. Certifiably insane. He claims he's from the future. "Hello? Hello?" Another voice in the tape called, presumably James Edmund Brown. "Hi. I need to send a message. I could tell you about all other kinds of catastrophe, but I need to warn you about the end. This isn't some terrorist attack. This isn't some war. Heck, this isn't even what I'd call a natural disaster. This is an unstoppable event, unless we can find some way to prevent it from ever happening. Let's see. I'm from 2016. And it just happened. Like clockwork. First we heard the booming. Then, at exactly midnight, the meteors came. We literally never even saw them coming. They just appeared out of nowhere. The thing I'm most scared about is whenever someone finds this message. Hopefully, it won't be too late. The universe just works like that, sometimes something is just meant to happen. With hope, dear listener, you may not just find this tape the same day the end happens. Please listen. Whatever you're doing, just stop. Try to leave. There's no point in making a shelter, you'll die anyway. I'm not even sure how I'm still alive. Please, just. The tape ended. Rachel looked at me, with fear in her eyes. "Rachel. We'll be fine. Wasn't this guy in a mental hospital or something? But what is this tape doing here?" And I thought I heard loud bangs. "So?" James Brown mentions booming in his explanation of his end. I heard them too. They were just fireworks. It's New Year's Eve. Of course people will be celebrating. This is why you've got to stop watching the Sci-Fi Channel. "I don't know." She seemed calmer. By the time we got down the people were already slow dancing to Forever Young. It was 11:59 when the house shook. Everybody screamed until one of my friends calmed all of them down. "It's just an earthquake," my friend said. Rachel was the only one still screaming. She ran outside. I yelled her name and followed her to the door. She left the house, and when I got to the door I found her out in the street. My watch beeped. It was 12 o'clock. Like clockwork, the stars fell. Meteors. We found out what the future would bring. And we were horrified. Credit to Fumbles Powers. Credit